It's time for Southern Fried Baseball, presented by College Baseball Central. Hosted by Jake McKeever as he talks everything SEC baseball and more.
Welcome in, College Baseball Central fans, as the Southern Fried Baseball trip rolls on in episode 9. Going to be something a little bit different. It's kind of the start of the quote-unquote new shows as we tend to wind down towards the backstretch of the season. Got a special hour-long episode for you today. As you can tell by the two jerseys in the background, we are going to be talking about the Ole Miss Rebels and the Missouri Tigers. If you've missed any of the other ones that are in front of this, I'll have links for those as well, as this is going to be number 9 and number 10 in our SEC deep dive as we're coming down the back stretch on this way going forward. Going to be doing 2 the rest of the way going from here on out. And then on that week before the season, we're going to be doing some special things down there. Let's go ahead and jump into it. The Ole Miss Rebels coming off, it is going to be another year with Mike Bianco. I know there were a lot of talks around him not returning. A lot of the new support staff going to have a new pitching coach too as well. So it's kind of a new look Rebels, if you will. But at the same time, it's also kind of the same old Rebels going forward. Sorry, as my producer's kind of messed it up there in the background. They've missed the tournament the last 2 years. 2 years ago, when they were the defending national championships, it felt like they were in it a little bit earlier. Last year, I think it was kind of what everybody knew going forward. They had some pitching issues. Like I said, they really addressed those. They're doing a lot of the same stuff that Mississippi State did in their post kind of national championship. So exciting stuff to see kind of where Ole Miss goes from here. From a stadium standpoint, I really kind of struggled with Swayze Field. I had them at 9th at one point behind Sewell Thomas. But I ended up kind of landing in that 6th spot because it is a lot better stadium than I remember. I know that I was kind of giving it some crap for it not getting the funding or the funding pulled, but the fans there make it awesome. When Ole Miss is going, it is one of the best places in the SEC. So I have them at 6 behind Alex Box, ahead of Condren Family Ballpark, which is in Florida. From a uniform standpoint, I ranked Ole Miss extremely, extremely low. I hate just about everything about Ole Miss's uniforms, if I'm being honest with you. They wear camo hats too much. If they wore their baby blues with red hats, I think they'd be a lot higher. I absolutely despise the camo hats. I absolutely despise that they use different typefaces and different fonts across their uniforms. My favorite one is obviously kind of their Rebels cream, but again, they ruin it by wearing a camo hat. It does kind of feel like Ole Miss has so much potential, as the baby blue jersey is the best uniform in college baseball when they pair it with the red hat. When they pair it with camo, it's the worst in the SEC. So if they can get more hats like they have there in that navy one with the M in that same one, I think that that'd be a great thing going forward, as that was one of the new things last year. But Ole Miss is going to be last in my uniform rankings. Here is the schedule for the Ole Miss Rebels. I'll get to see them week 1 as they play Clemson, Louisville, Oklahoma State, kind of in that side of the bracket. I know Mike and I are going to be there talking about how they play against the SEC or the ACC teams. Really kind of a proving point for Ole Miss. If you remember back in 2021, they went and absolutely swept, dominated in that tournament, really kind of kickstart a good season for them. Then they play Eastern Kentucky and Wright State and Jacksonville State in their weekend series. They do play at South Alabama. They do play, obviously, Mississippi State. They play Memphis in their midweeks. They play Southern Miss twice. So lots of intriguing midweeks. From an SEC standpoint, they go Arkansas at Missouri. We'll talk about here in a little bit. Florida at Kentucky. Tennessee at South Carolina. They do have that midweek with the Governor's Cup sandwiched between South Carolina and Vandy. Backstretch, it's at OU, at Mississippi State, probably the two most polar opposite stadiums in the SEC. And then they finish it up at Auburn. It is a very tough schedule. I know that I'll talk about it again. We talk about Missouri too as well. Unfortunately, Ole Miss and Missouri don't have the luxuries of playing themselves, as they are kind of going to be our two bottom teams in the SEC, just a little bit of a precursor. Maybe this will be the year that Ole Miss kind of wins the Governor's Cup, or at least wins the series with Mississippi State, as it's been a long, long time since they've done both of those. But the schedule does present itself to kind of be a good RPI boost. It's not going to be a Florida around 500 RPI boost, but if they win 35 games, this should be a tournament team. Replacing, this is going to be an interesting one, as they're replacing Andrew Fisher, who obviously went over to Tennessee along with Liam Doyle. Ethan Groff graduated. Jackson Ross graduated. Trayson Hughes is going to Virginia Tech, and Eli Birch went down to Louisiana Tech. They returned Riley Maddox. They returned Mason Nichols. So for as bad of a team as they were they really kind of do return a lot of it. I'm sure that they wish that Andrew Fisher was still there. I'm sure that they wish Liam Doyle was still there. There's a lot on the pitching side as we'll kind of jump into it here in this next segment. That, if I'm being honest with you, leaves a lot to be desired. I have Ole Miss as the 9th of 9 in our SEC pitching rankings. I did put a little bit of an asterisk there because I want to clarify that they have a lot of guys. They have some talent. And we'll talk about it too with Missouri as well. It's just, I don't know what you're going to get with Hunter Elliott. If you remember, he was superb on that national championship team. He pitched 2 games in 2023. He pitched against A&M, he pitched in non-SEC play, and then he came back against LSU, got absolutely shelled, didn't come pitch again. 2024, didn't pitch again. I know that there were kind of talks of him being in pitching. So what version of him are we going to see? This is going to be his fifth year. His senior year, technically. I think he's technically still a sophomore, and I'm sure he could appeal it. But what are you going to get from him? At times, he was the SEC ace of the staff as a freshman, but I mean, a lot has changed in college baseball since Ole Miss won that national championship, but Hunter Elliott still is going to be there. Mason Nichols is another guy that I really kind of expect to take big steps forward. He made 21 appearances again on that 2022 national championship, still kind of hanging around. Both of them could have signed pro contracts last year. Both of them obviously are coming back. I know Elliott, for the stuff that he has, it was always expected that he was going to be back just because his ranking was super low. Riley Maddox is another guy that kind of spurred the draft, and Connor Spencer in that kind of bullpen swing closer role. Those are 4 guys that are, like I said, are later rounds MLB guys that all told them down now. I'm really excited to kind of see what this Ole Miss staff goes because I think that they're going to go as far as these guys take them. The hitting, they're going to be able to score runs. I don't think they're going to be near the top in the SEC and runs scored, but the pitching just has to be better. And I think it starts too with Mason Morris. He's another guy that I think is going to be really good for them. He's looking really good. He's added a few more pounds of muscle as he's up to 225. His ERA was around 6.5 last year. If he can cut down a run or 2, I think that that's going to go a long way for them. He's made huge jumps in the fall as he kind of throws that sinker fastball that it's up to 96, which again is going to win you a lot of games in the SEC if you have a sinker that runs 96. The slider and the changeup is really good. There's a lot to kind of like about him. Will McCaslin is another guy that Monty and I talked about over the summer who had a really good year for the Harbor Hawks up there at the Cape. I think he can kind of come in. He was with the Bourne Braves. He had an ERA under 1.3. He is kind of susceptible to the long ball as he is a low 90s guy. He's somebody that I could really kind of expect to break out. Cade Townsend, I've heard, has had a really good fall with some of the Ole Miss beat writers that I've talked to. It's a weird kind of quirky arm slot, and I think that he's one that is just kind of a good change of pace guy. I think he can kind of eat some of those innings for Ole Miss. Like I said, he's up to 95, which is really kind of strange for a weird arm slot, weird motion kind of guy. But I think that there's a lot to like in this Ole Miss team. Moving on as we go into the projected lineup here, as I'll kind of move the graphics away for a second. Ole Miss is going to be rolling with a lot of the same guys. Obviously, this is who I project to kind of go through, and I'll talk about some of the position battles and hint on a few guys going forward. Campbell Smithwick is who I expect to kind of win that catching job. Obviously, they brought in 2 transfers in Austin Fawley and Collard Ryder. Fawley from Kentucky, Reuter from BYU, so guys with Power 5 experience. Obviously, I think that tells you everything that you need to know about Campbell Smithwick and how Mike Bianco feels about it. Obviously, it's the SEC. You're going to have competition. But he started 30 games for them as a true freshman last year. I'm going to be honest with you. It looked like the moment was too big for him at times. Mike Bianco mentioned it by term that, hey, maybe we counted on him a little bit too much. The moment was a little bit too big. But the 2 guys that are coming in, I think what we know what we're going to get with Campbell Smithwick, he hit 266 for them. Like I said, he really faded. The defense, I think he at times showed that he was a freshman who was going to be in there for his bat. Fawley, I think, is another one. I know that he has an injury that he's working through from the Omaha Bowl that they do. If he can kind of come in, he has that SEC experience. He has that Omaha pedigree experience. I know that he didn't play a lot behind Devin Burks, but if he learned a lot from Devin Burks, I think he can kind of bring that into the staff. I think he has a chance to carve out a role. And then Reuter coming over from BYU. I know that he has the ridiculously high OPS. Should be noted that he did play at BYU, so a lot of their stats are inflated just because of how high they are up in the mountain. But he did hit a home run up there with during the fall workout, as they call it, the Omaha Challenge. Actually, I don't know if it's still called the Omaha Challenge, but he's over there competing in it. I think the catcher, one of those three guys, is going to win it. I might even see one of those guys kind of turn into be a DH. Like we talked about with a few other guys, Will Furnace is going to be a guy that's going to play first for him. He's going to have to take, I think, a big step forward from an average standpoint. He profiles a lot like Hunter Hines, where he's, a one true outcome guy. He either strikes out or hit a home run. He had 9 home runs for him last year, which was good for fourth on the team. 8 doubles, again, but the slugging percentage was fourth highest on the team. But he hit only 230. And granted, you're going to sit here and say, okay, he hit better in SEC play. I mean, 230, there's just no way around it. If you're going to be a bat first guy, you have to do better than 230. I think if Ole Miss wants to have a bolstered lineup, Will Furnace is going to have to be a lot better. But the good news is I think he has a ton of talent to kind of move in and be kind of an elite first baseman. I don't think he's going to be all SEC caliber, but I think he can kind of work his way into be an everyday first baseman for Ole Miss and not just a hole in the lineup. Shortstop, I think, is another one that's really kind of up for grabs. Luke Hill played short last year for him. Braden Randall is another guy that played short for him as well. Luke Chang coming over from Illinois State. He's another guy that I really kind of like to watch. 6-foot righty with good kind of bat to ball skills as well. My prediction with it is I think that they move Luke Hill over to second base. He played a lot there in the fall. He played 18 games from there last year when Randall played short. He's going to have to be a lot better too as well. I know you're going to sit here and say, okay, he was second on the team in average. It was only 291. Luke Hill was brought in to be an elite hitter, and I think that he's going to break that 300 threshold, be the guy that Ole Miss kind of counted on him to be, the guy that was brought in to be. I know that he brought a ton of baggage. There was a ton of off-the-field stuff with him. I think this year he's kind of flown under the radar in a good way, and I really do expect Luke Hill to kind of break out and have one of his best seasons that he's had in college. He hits everywhere. He doesn't hit for a ton of pop. I think he's more of a gap-to-gap guy. Walks a lot, which again I think is a very underrated stat in the SEC. There's a lot of guys that throw really hard but kind of miss the zone. I expect Luke Hill to kind of be in that second base role. And then in shortstop, I do kind of have a little bit of a surprise. I do have Luke Chang starting as the shortstop for them. Like I said, he's a really, really tremendous guy at 373. Granted, it was only in 16 games for Illinois State, and it was Illinois State. But he needs a glove first guy for Ole Miss. I think that he's going to be the starting shortstop. You could kind of make an argument then that, Braden Randall moves over to short. Does he move into the outfield? I really like what Randall does. He started 20 games from last year at shortstop, 14 at second base. He is a little bit of a smaller guy, but he has a really active arm. He moves really well at shortstop, so he is a natural shortstop. I could see him kind of moving over to be that third base. I think he's going to be in the mix, but ultimately I think he's going to find himself fighting for that starting role. Third base, I have Judd Uttermark coming over. He had an absolutely tremendous fall for him. He's 6'5". I could see him kind of playing first, too, if Furnace kind of slips a little bit as well. He can also play in the outfield. He started 27 games from last year, most of them coming at third, and I think that that's where he'll kind of be. But, again, Ole Miss has a lot of guys that need to take huge steps forward, and Uttermark, I think, is another one of those guys where he's going to be in the lineup. You just really don't know where. I could kind of see him as kind of like a Bear Jones from LSU, taking gradual steps forward and really earning himself into being a feared name in the SEC. Moving into the outfield, Ryan Moorman is back again. He started 52 games for them last year, hitting 259, 19 home runs. He was the team leader in home runs. I think it's a pretty safe bet to say he's going to be in left field. If he can kind of continue to add to those power numbers, continue to raise the average, play, the defense that he does, I think that he's going to find himself in the Ole Miss lineup every single day like he did last year. In the outfield, Isaac Humphrey in right field. He's another guy that started 54 games for him. He finished 310, 13 home runs, or 13 doubles, 10 home runs. I think he's going to be in right field. Left field and right field are definitely going to be the batting strength of this team. Center fielder is another one where we talked about it's a little bit of a battle. There's a few guys that you think could play center field that you can talk about, but I have Mitchell Sanford coming over from Uno. If you remember correctly, he was at old LSU a few years ago too as well. Southland hitter of the year. I really enjoyed watching him when I watched some of the Southland games. He hit nearly 400. And again, Southland has some really, really elite pitching staffs, as Lamar was second in the entire country. Nichols had 2 Friday night guys and gave Oregon fits up there. So that 381, you can kind of say here it's an asterisk and say, oh, it's Southland. It's a lot better than advertised. So I really like what he has going forward. I expect him to kind of be in that center field role. I think he'll be a little bit better than Groff was last year. He definitely has a lot more pop at 15 home runs. I think he has a little bit of a stronger arm. I know that was kind of Ethan Groff's calling card. But I expect Mitchell Sanford to kind of be in that mix for that SEC Newcomer of the Year going forward. Is a lot on Ole Miss. I did cut out the clip art as my producer was talking about that. Where do I rank this Ole Miss team? I have them 9 of 9 behind Alabama. I know that was what I was saying with Alabama is okay. I still think they're kind of a fringe top 25 team. I think this is going to be an absolutely long year for Ole Miss. They are replacing a ton of talent that they were supposed to replace in the portal. They really didn't get it. Football is taking up a lot of their NIL money. Basketball is taking up a lot of their NIL money. I'm really interested to see where Ole Miss goes from here because I know that I feel like we've been talking about Bianco on the hot seat. I never really want to talk about coaches being fired. It just feels like Ole Miss has kind of given up a little bit from a fan standpoint after winning the national championship. I know that State had a ton of buy-in after. I don't feel like Mike Bianco is getting the help that he needs at Ole Miss. So I'm really kind of hoping that he wins some of these games early, gets the ball rolling, wins some of these SEC series, and Ole Miss kind of gets it rolling here. Last slide, obviously, before we move on to Missouri. Here is the bell curve that I have for Ole Miss. I think their absolute peak is making the tournament. I think it's going to take every single thing breaking right for them. It's going to take the pitching staff that has a ton of question marks, a ton of guys back, working with a new coach, slashing their ERA in half. Ultimately, I think this team's going to miss the tournament. If you're really looking at it, I think there's going to be about 12 SEC teams, and I don't see how Ole Miss finishes above a ton of these teams that are in this mix. I could see kind of how they could finish above maybe somebody who has an Auburn type year last year, or Missouri, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. Their bottom thing, and I think it's a lot closer to happening than them making the tournament, is them finishing last in the SEC. There's really a lot of pieces in place where if you were just to take them isolated and you were maybe to talk about them, in the Big 12 or something like that, they would kind of be in the mix to be a tournament team. You just look up and down at some of these rosters that the SEC teams have. You see what Ole Miss has and who they're bringing back, who they have in guys that are competing for jobs versus guys that they chose to not hit the portal with. And it leaves something to be desired. And unfortunately, I think that this is going to be a long year for the Ole Miss Rebels. That is all we have from a time cut standpoint. Obviously, Amani goes in and does these clips. I'll go ahead and leave it on as we can talk about this Missouri Tigers team. It is Carrick Johnson's second season coming over from Memphis. 2 years ago, I felt like when they got their coach fired, they were really, really close to kind of making some stuff in. And then this year, Coach Carrick Johnson, they were in a lot of the games late. They had just a phenomenal amount of injuries, almost an astonishing rate of not being able to hit as they hit 220 in SEC play. The pitching, like I said, it had a lot of injuries with stuff like that. So they get a little bit of a pass on them, but Missouri's going to be back. They have yet. Actually, they've only made tournament once as an SEC team, never made it out of the first weekend as an SEC team. So Missouri has very tempered expectations, I would say, is the best way to describe them. Taylor Stadium, I do have it last in the SEC. I don't think it's a bad ballpark by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that a lot of these SEC teams are cathedrals. I still think it's a top, 30, top 40 in the sport. It's better than you would expect for Missouri, but I do have it last. Unfortunately, somebody has to be last, Missouri. But I absolutely love Missouri's uniforms going forward. I think that they have the best road set in the entire country with their kind of smoky gray. I mean, as you can tell, I bought one of their old ones behind me. I absolutely love their blacks. I love their home whites. There's really, really a lot of good looks for this Missouri. I have them behind Georgia and I have them behind Kentucky strictly from a color standpoint, but I do have them above that Auburn team. From a scheduling standpoint, Missouri is going to go out and play a lot of these teams early. They play in the Puerto Rico Classic. They draw Penn State, UConn, and Stetson. That's going to be one where they have a chance to kind of pick up some wins. As I know a lot of us are really high on Penn State. UConn was a tournament team last year. Stetson, I believe, is kind of always in the mix to be a tournament team too as well. Then they are having a little bit of history with the Andre Dawson Classic. They are the first non-HBCU team to play in the Andre Dawson Classic as they draw Florida A&M, Alabama State, and Southern. I think that's due to just Carrick Johnson, all the RBI stuff that Andre Dawson really preaches on. So, shout out to Missouri for going out and playing some of these HBCUs. FAMU's always going to be one of the better teams. I don't really know a lot about Alabama A&M or Southern, as I know Grambling and FAMU are kind of the only two teams I know about in Southland. But Evansville is another one. They were in a super regional last year. If you remember, they gave Tennessee a bunch of fits. Binghamton's coming down. So they have kind of a very underrated non-conference slate going forward. And then when they get into SEC play, like I said with Ole Miss, unfortunately, Missouri doesn't get to play themselves. They go to the box, Ole Miss, Texas. That's going to be a tough stretch. Texas, Arkansas, at Florida. Those are teams that are probably going to be ranked in the top 15, some of them in the top 10. Then they go to OU comes to town. It's kind of a little bit of a rivalry game with them. They go to Alabama. Georgia comes up to Missouri, and then ending it with Texas A&M and Mississippi State. A&M's obviously our preseason number one. Mississippi State's always going to be in that fringe hosting spot. So it's going to take an absolute a Herculean effort, I think, to get Missouri into the tournament just because of the schedule that they play. But I think if there's anyone that can do it, Kerrick Johnson with this pitching staff. I think that there are a lot to like about this team going forward. For this one, like I said, they're going to be replacing Bryson Meyer, who's their Saturday guy. Ryan Majdick is another one who was their Sunday guy. Trevor Austin has moved on into the pros. Matt Garcia and Diego Culberson are moving on to as well. So there's a lot that they're going to be replacing. Danny Corona, I'm going to be honest with you, I do not know if he is back. He doesn't post on his socials or anything like that. I did read the D1 article that said he was back. I did not find them on their 2025 roster. So hopefully Danny Corona is their first baseman or DH just because of where we saw him at Wake a few years ago. But as of right this second, 7:30, 122, he was not on the roster. Maybe I was just overlooking some stuff. That is unbelievably small. So I will just go ahead and read it out to you. I do have Missouri as the 8th ranked pitching staff behind a talented Kentucky and ahead of an Alabama one. There really is a lot of question marks in the stuff. Javier Pinto, I think, is their best starter that comes back. He had that 3.61 ERA from last year. It's a little bit deceptive as he did have a tendency to kind of give up gopher balls, extra base hits, stuff like that. Had only a 205 opponent's batting average. And then obviously he's a pound the zone guys. He only walked 15 for him as well. Again, in SEC play, the ERA was over 4. He kind of ran out of gas there a little bit at the end just because of all the injuries that Missouri had. I think he logged a little bit too many innings. I think they're going to be very cognizant of where he sits at his innings. I expect his ERA to kind of be around that 340, 330, which again in the SEC I think is going to win you a lot of games. Another guy that I really kind of expect to kind of have a big uptick is Brock Lucas. He took some huge steps for him last year. I think was a big part of why this Missouri team was so good. He's another guy that has a low opponent's batting average at 215. Really kind of a throwback college pitcher as he's a low 90s guy. Throws a 4-pitch mix as well. Huge guy at 6'3". It almost kind of gets on you a little bit fast. I really like him to kind of take over, be that Saturday role. And then from there, the last guy that I have is kind of an unknown and guys that I got to watch a little film on. Daniel Whistler is another one. He had a 4.38 ERA with 39 strikeouts. Lefty. I really liked what he did. When I read some of the false stuff from D1, they said that he added a ton of muscle. He seems to be throwing a lot harder. I know that this thing that really jumped out to me was when I watched some of his stuff, especially against Kentucky, was the swing and miss stuff on his off speed. I believe it's a 3-pitch mix. It's a circle changeup is what I was kind of coming to grab for it, but ESPN obviously didn't help me out with that. I think it's more of a sweeping curveball too as well from the lefty side. ESPN called it a slider and D1 did too as well. I kind of saw it as more of a sweeper. But he's kind of another guy that I expect to be kind of in that flex role. Then from there, there's obviously a ton of unknown guys. There's 4 guys, like I said, that had meaningful injuries from last year. Ian Loesch, Tony Newbeck, Ben Smith, and Will Libert are kind of the 4 kind of unknown guys that when I went and watched film on this Missouri team that really didn't stand out. He had a ton of – we'll start off with Ian Loesch. I know that Kerrick Johnson was super high on him as he's up to 95 with a high 80s cutter. He has a 4-pitch mix. Hopefully he can kind of stay healthy too as well. Tony Newbeck is a guy that missed all of the last 2 seasons. We did see him briefly in 2023, and he did look good, albeit in less than 20 innings and only a few appearances. But I think he's another one that you could kind of expect to take steps forward. Ben Smith, he's going to be healthy again. He was a guy that I was really excited about this time last year, as he does have that kind of mid-80s fastball that always seems to kind of locate it. Reminds me almost like a J.B. Moyer, Greg Maddux, that kind of one. I think that he's going to be another guy that really kind of takes on a big role for them. And then outside of that, I think it's a lot of unknowns for Missouri. Kerrick Johnson's going to get the most out of this pitching staff. You know that if Missouri wants to win, it's going to be winning those 2-1, 3-2 ball games. So I think that the pitching is going to surprise a lot of people, and I think that they're going to pull some of these upsets early on. Projected lineup for Missouri. I can be honest, there was a lot of guys that are unknown, like I said. Jackson Lovich is a guy that I could really kind of expect. You don't know if he's going to play third, if he's going to play first, play a corner outfield spot. He hit 287 for them, was their best hitter. And every single ESPN stuff that I saw in their games last year, Jackson Lovich was highlighted. I already mentioned Danny Corona. I think if he can kind of get into that lineup too as well, I would really like what I would see from him. I know that he kind of flew a little bit under the radar. Obviously he was pushed out a little bit at Wake, but you almost got to forget that he's there. If he can kind of get into the lineup, I think Missouri can kind of breeze a little easily from there. And then obviously Brock Daniels, I think, is another guy that really kind of took on that Cam Chick leader role last year. They get him back again. He was their best hitter in SEC play. Like I said, they mentioned they hit about 220 in SEC play. He hit around 280 for him. Was really good defender too as well. And then outside of that, I think it's a lot of unknowns for Missouri. In the outfield, I think that, there's a few guys that can kind of stick in the corner spot. I like Missouri to go really, really athletic. I know Carrick Johnson knows that they're not going to bang the ball around the yard, score double-digit runs. I really like Caden Pierre and Jarrett Curtis, one of them to play center, one of them to play left or right, and make this a really, really athletic outfield. Caden Pierre, if you remember, he had absolutely just motor stuff, really kind of plays the game the right way. Reminds me a ton of a Pete Rose. And then Jarrett Curtis, for his athleticness, Caden Pierre seems when you watch film on him. Carrick Johnson has said that, Curtis is an even better athlete than him. As some of the stuff that they had was just absolutely record breaking. One of those guys is probably going to hit leadoff, and then from there, if they can get on base, steal bases, I think that's going to be an absolute menace on the base path. Both of those guys, I think that's kind of where Missouri does it. Is if they play like in Oklahoma, they're going to have a lot of success right there. From a freshman standpoint, I think Brady Purcell is a guy that could kind of get in. He did play first in high school. He was a very highly rated recruit, as he was the number one player in Missouri. Usually guys like that get drafted or go to bigger schools. Missouri kept him in state, so you see that Carrick Johnson's recruiting really well. I think he's a guy that could kind of be that third outfielder, depending on where they go with Jarrett Curtis and Caden Pierre. I think he could play a left. He could play a right. He is a very athletic. I know that a lot of times when you see first baseman in high school, you think that, they're just going to be fat slobs, kind of like a Hunter Hines. I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean from a defensive standpoint. He's an athletic guy. He can definitely play in the outfield. He tracks fly balls really, really well. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Nolan McCarthy. I think he's one. He's added a little bit of muscle just from the perfect game stuff that I saw was definitely dated as it was from 2022. And I was actually a little bit worried. He looks to be another guy. Carrick Johnson continues to kind of get his guys in there. He's got some more guys coming over from Memphis and Cameron Benson and Pierre Seals. Seals is another kind of speedster, fast guys. He had double-digit home runs as well as double-digit steals. Benson's a really kind of bigger guy at 6'4". When I watched him play last year against Rice, he really kind of stood out. He had a big hit for them, clutch hit late. He's an absolute menace in BP. I saw him clear the street at Rice last year in BP. He's somebody that could really kind of take big steps going forward for him. If he can kind of hit about 280, give him 15, 16 home runs, I think that'll go a long way. And then from there, like I said, it's a lot of unknown guys. JUCO's, Carrick Johnson has continued to recruit JUCO well. I think that, like I mentioned on our Big 12 show, that a lot of these schools that can't get these NIL buy-ins, I think they almost kind of count on JUCO guys. Danny Ramirez is a guy coming over. He hit 358 for him at Seminole State College in Florida. I think he's one that you could really kind of track to kind of get into a starting role. Another guy is Blake Simpson. He's a Canadian coming over from Connors State, Oklahoma. Really high average guy. I believe he hit 400. I didn't see any film on them, unfortunately, just because JUCO stuff is so hard to find. And then lastly, I kind of lump these guys in with JUCO or the D3 NAIA guys. Caden Nicoletto, another Australian guy coming in. If he can kind of translate to, again, it's NAIA, you can expect about 150. He hit, I think 410 for him. I'll have to go up and check the stats. 394. I think if he can hit about 280, that's what you'd expect out of him. He would find himself in the lineup too as well. Carrick Johnson has a lot of pieces to kind of play with, a lot of guys that you think can be plug-and-play guys. The outfield, I think, is definitely going to be the strength of this team. Their athleticism is going to be the strength of this team. They're going to play uniquely. I think if they play like a Kentucky, play like a Kentucky in Oklahoma, that's where I think that this team finds success. Like I said, there's a lot of unknowns about this Missouri team. I am really rooting for them hard. I do have them ranked 10th of 10th right now. Somebody has to be last, kind of like with Pitt. I think if they were in another conference, we'd be talking about this Missouri team a lot differently. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. Like Ole Miss, I think that it's going to be Missouri and Ole Miss battling for the SEC. I think they're going to miss the tournament. Unfortunately, their ceiling to me is a tournament team, being a 2 seed, being a 3 seed, which Missouri, I think that's kind of what you strive for if you're a coach of somebody like that. As we kind of come on the 30-minute mark, unfortunately, there just wasn't a lot to talk about. So while I said this was going to be a special hour-long Southern Fried Baseball, this one's only going to be 30 minutes going forward. Next week, it is going to be Oklahoma and Tennessee. So be sure to tune into that one. The week after that, we're going to have A&M in Texas. I know I'm missing one, but we're going to have Vandy and somebody else too at the end. South Carolina. South Carolina and Vandy there at the end. But, Oklahoma, Missouri and Ole Miss, that is our deep dives on them. They're two teams that preseason we have at 15 and 16. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it wouldn't surprise me if one of these teams does not finish 15th. I could see kind of somebody sliding down or them playing up. Ole Miss, I think, has the potential to kind of play themselves up the highest way. But on what we've seen Bianco push tournament, it really doesn't give me a lot of faith. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. See everybody next week on Southern Fried Baseball.